It's 12 o'clock in Frisco, Texas, and it's time for Smoker Broker Radio with Robert Mesh, a.k.a. the Smoker Broker. Robert is the owner of Small World Realty and has employed hundreds of real estate agents in his 17-year career. He has instructed and mentored over 10,000 real estate agents at the highly acclaimed Champions School of Real Estate and is considered an expert in Texas residential realty. Robert is also an advocate of true entrepreneurial spirit and has helped many to transition from corporate America into the world of self-employment. And now live from the studio to your world, the Smoker Broker.
Hey, welcome to Smoker Broker. I'm Robert Mesh, and I'm the guy they call Smoker Broker. You won't find many real estate professional barbecue guys out there. There are plenty of them at barbecue, but there are very few that take it to the level that we do. I was talking last week about how we had the World Championships just this past weekend. That's something we don't normally do. We don't compete as much as we used to. That's usually charity that we do our barbecue stuff for, but we do still do the pro level every once in a while. We did it this past weekend, and like I said in our last show, we finished the middle of the pack pretty much everybody, but we did finish 17th in sausage with about 700 people or so, with pretty much the world's best out there. So that was a highlight for us. And it's pretty much why we keep going back. It's something we enjoy doing, and we're not half bad at it every once in a while. If we stay sober, we're really good, but it was good to be back to the World Championships there. We had a great time, and that is, in fact, where that Smoker Broker name comes from. A lot of people always ask about it, and that's what we do. I actually run what's called the FDR group at Keller Williams. I think it's sometimes overshadowed by the fact that I do the barbecue stuff, but I'm actually a much better real estate agent and broker than I am a barbecue guy, so thankful for my guys on that piece of it. I always bring some of my crew in. I can't do this by myself, and like I said, they're usually a lot better at than I am at it. I got my buddy Mike Dellis up there, longtime friend and a real estate agent with me as well. Got Mr. Gary Rich on my corner. He is a mentor of mine. He's taught me how to be a long-term instructor, and he's become quite the friend over the years. He runs our stuff down there in the San Antonio area in South Texas, down the coast, Corpus Christi, and all that good stuff. Got Miss Richa, who's probably one of the smartest agents that we have. We were just bragging on her about her last show and her analysis. I was telling Mike that literally, I think even a PhD would have probably said that's a good assessment to what's happening. And then I got my buddy down there, Phil Goff, and his assessment pretty damn good too. So Phil is actually one of our primary lending vendors, but I asked him to come on. He was an appraiser at a time, and he was very clear. It's not something he did for a very long at all, but he has some insight. So I asked him to come on with us today because we are going to talk about appraisals. We hadn't done it in a long time, and we're going to go ahead and discuss it because it's changing with the shift. It affects us the way we do things. It's going to be interesting how the document about the addendum per appraisal, how often we're going to see that anymore. We go from it's on almost everyone to where it almost disappears. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about the intricacies of the appraisal process. Now, if you watched our show last week on finance, we were discussing why the FHA or the VA can have some issues. Well, we're going to continue those conversations probably at a deeper level on this particular show because the appraisal process can be held up depending on whether you went one of the government routes. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time, especially Richa and Phil for doing double duty for me there for today's show. You all see the shows every week, but we actually do them back-to-back these days. Since we're not so much in the live studio anymore because of the COVID pandemic. But actually, now that that's all done, we actually prefer doing it this way anyway. So it's more convenient for us. We're able to get more shows out. Plus, we've done a ton of them. We've got to be close to the upper 150s or 160s by now. We're almost on our third year of doing this. We absolutely love it. It conveys our brand. And it also is a great educational tool. It just gives you a tip of what we have to offer in our particular group. So let's talk about appraisals in general. So let's talk historically about how appraisals came about and what's happened over the years to get us where we're at today. You know, there was a point in time where money was lent and it was just given on good faith. Say, here, you pay us back, whatever. Well, it didn't take most financial institutions long to figure out that that just doesn't work. So they're going to have to look at other things. And one of the other things became collateral of the house itself. So they said, well, look, we're going to bring this part of it in, and we're going to say it has to be worth this amount before we get that kind of money. So we go through this for the longest time. It's flexible. I mean, like, it's probably too stringent. I mean, or not stringent. Anybody can get a loan. We used to joke before 2008, you could have, you know, I guess I'll show my age. You could have had Mr. Ed, you know, order a, do a loan, and he would have got the loan. Still, like, did I watch that show? But it was just anybody could get one. You know, it was just so flexible. Well, then the crash in 2008 comes, and they just hammer the lenders. And you know what? Rightfully so. Even with Bill being one, although he was one after, so he doesn't count. But even before then, they crucified those guys. They were like, y'all gave that money to everybody, and y'all are the reason why we're here. And there was some truth to it. So in the government's ultimate wisdom, the way they fix everything is they decided to go the polar opposite. They decided to make it as stringent as possible for somebody to get money, and they put all these rules into place. And a lot of these rules came down and affected the appraisal industry. One of the most noted was the Dodd-Frank Act, which is typically not considered a very friendly real estate act. It has nothing to do politically with who Dodd is, or, you know, it's just a matter of it was very detailed in what we're responsible for and how it affects us. And it had life-lasting changes to us, and continues until something changes about it. So one of the significances to the Dodd-Frank Act, or the Frank-Dodd Act, whichever way it goes.
You had it right.
All right.
Dodd-Frank.
Dodd-Frank. Yeah.
They added what was called a collateral underwriting agreement, to where they finally let an appraiser start attributing value to upgrades. See, up until that point, a lot of people are surprised by this too. Up until 2008 or so, most of us, when we valued a house, whether it was an appraiser or whether it was a real estate agent, we rarely took into account upgrades for the value of your home. Now, that irritated a lot of people. A lot of people would be like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, for instance, they'd be like, well, why, if these two houses are the exact same, I can't get them equal here. If these two houses are the exact same, yet mine has $50,000 more of upgrade, then why are we selling for close to the same amount? So common sense wise, a lot of people argue, well, that's not right. It doesn't make sense. But that's the way we did it. We looked at square feet. We looked at the location, the age. Those are the primary things that we looked at when we comped the house. And we still do. Appraisers as well. This is still the generics that we look at. However, appraisers have gotten into where they try to give value to an upgrade. Now, when this first came out, some people were like, you know what, it's probably about time. Yeah, you're right. It's not fair that someone put all that stuff. Like, me and Dallas are a great example. Dallas is as handy as can be. I can't do a damn thing. He's always doing more upgrades than I'm going to have. So if we have the same house, you know, he's going to be like, well, why the hell is Mesh's house selling for the same as mine? I've worked, 500,000 hours more than he has. Here's the reason why it was always like that, okay? You can have someone that would put $20,000 worth of hardwood down. And they would be like, well, I added $20,000 to my house where they didn't do anything. No. You put $20,000 in, but it's very possible that you were a sucker and you paid twice what that would have cost. So why should I pay for your stupidity? Why should I pay $20,000 because you did? Like, me and Mike are a great example. Mike would be the guy, or whatever I would buy, I would have spent 20, and he would have gone and probably spent 7 on it and said, well, you're a dumbass. Why'd you do that? So this is out there. Okay. This is a problem that we have. And the appraiser goes in, and Phil was super clear about it. He's like, hey, I'll come on and answer basic questions. I'm curious about his opinion when it comes to saying that is worth this. I want to hear him say what he would think, because I've always been of the opinion, I think they just threw something out there and said, that's as close as I can come to it. Because here's the thing, no matter what, no matter whether Phil's right, no matter whether I'm right, it's subjective. And anytime you have subjectivity into adding an amount to something, we're going to have problems on an ultimate value. Yeah. And if that ultimate value is off, we could have an issue with a loan falling through. So I want to bring my friend in, Phil, here. And like I said, I appreciate you coming back to back for me. And I appreciate you saying, hey, look, I can answer a few, because I get that. But your few is going to be good enough. Tell me your generic feeling about when you became, I actually like the fact that you only did it for a little bit, because I think your answer will be more genuine. How did you feel about when you first started looking at appraisals? Were you doing it during the time where they did start saying, hey, you can account for an upgrade or take away for lack of upgrades?
So to be honest, I don't remember that being a hard, fast rule. Okay. However, as part of your comparisons, you look for houses that are similarly upgraded. If you have a house with a pool, you look for at least one comp with a pool, so you can see what the value difference is between a house with a pool and a house without a pool. Because you're right, otherwise it's completely subjective. Like you know, but to begin with, my opinion might not be the state's opinion.
No, I don't care. I want to hear it.
A house's value is a gray area. It's like anything else. Your house could be worth between $250 and $280. And I think the reason that appraisals began, with everything you're saying, was more to stop predatory stuff from happening, right? People from coming and buying houses way less than they were worth and way more than they were worth. So, to me, if it's within $10,000 or so, I don't really see a problem.
Phil, you just said something, and I know it's because you have the same background that I do, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I still don't understand why I'm not listened to. So Phil has an accounting background like I do, and it doesn't surprise me he said that the way that he does, because he's alluding to something that is terribly missing right now in this appraisal issue that we have. Most large corporations, when they do their accounting, there's no fancy word for it. They use what's called a plug. When they get to where the amounts are off and they just don't tie completely, they'll put what they call a plug to even it out. Well, a big corporation plug, you could be talking like 3 or 4 million sometimes. And by the way, this is what causes a lot of corporations to get in trouble, because usually when you see some type of fraud, it's because of these plugs.
Why would you look at variances? Yeah.
Right. Well, here's my thing. The way it's drafted now, an appraiser comes in, we're at, $300K value. The appraiser comes in like at $295. That should never fall through because of its proximity. He actually said the right amount too. Like if it's within 10%, I'm like, the whole purpose of the appraiser was to stop fraud.
It undermines the free market.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So if it stops fraud, then why, if something's off 5%, clearly no fraud was being driven there. That's very possible that there was a difference of opinions. No one's trying to screw anybody. How can a loan be trashed because of it? Those guidelines are written by someone who does not understand financial common sense when it comes to home values. And got Phil, once again, his wording. How did you? But
how often is that happening?
Oh my God!
By 5%, 10%.
Oh my God! Oh, off by less.
In the last year, a ton.
Oh my God! Yeah, right? historically, a 10% or more, or 10% less. I'd say.
Okay, but that is but historically, in what homes are selling for now, right? That's my issue, right? I listed the house for $1 million, and the person who's buying it is buying it for 1.4. So if you're telling me my appraisal came in at 1.390, how is that possible? My house is worth $1 million based on sales, not what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Right. Definitely last couple of years, a different type of appraisal issue. This time, we're not talking so much about was there an upgrade to or a lack of upgrades that caused
the upgrades just go out the window.
Right,
it makes
right.
no
We just got
difference.
someone paid more,
What
right?
upgrade? You can have a
Right.
pool, you can have an asbestos infection, infestation at that point. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So like, how do you account for that gap in terms of an appraisal, right? And so then why can the appraisal fall through in 5%?
You're right. And where you would have to have this is, and Phil probably knew this when we started talking about it, this is probably much more geared towards a home that's under 400,000 than it is for a home over, because you can have, go ahead, Phil, who was saying something?
Oh, I wasn't saying that. I was just nodding my head. Yes.
No, say it. Go ahead.
Well, when you get, the higher you get, and actually really that keeps going up. If you get above like a conventional level or an FHA level, then a lot of times it's harder to qualify for those loans, but the restrictions are way less. So because
and the
level of qualifying makes it so that the risk is way less on the bank, so they're willing to look to the left a little bit. Basically.
Richa, you do make a good point that this is more geared towards the. Actually, if you want to have a real intelligent conversation about it, it actually merges with the conversation we had on the other show. If we're running towards a
major housing crisis,
400,000, right? Then why are we talking? It does make me wonder whether we see it or not.
But again, those are unfortunately the group of people that don't have an extra $10,000 just sitting around to meet the gap.
Yeah.
Well, a $400,000 house at 5% is $20K.
That's right.
Right.
That's so much.
$20,000 to someone buying a $400,000 house is large.
It is a large sum.
1.4 is not a big deal at all.
I understand the difference between the two. What I'm saying is I'm not in favor of the appraisal, not like the lender not approving or backing out of the loan because of a 5 or 10% variance.
Right. You're
at
saying
the 400,000 price point.
Yeah.
Well,
I got it. You're actually saying that that probably is not going to happen in the upper ones, but even if it did, it's ridiculous because that you're actually saying in a different way than what we're saying. They should not be able to go through there and say we're not doing this. And I like your take on it was different than I was going for, but it's the same one. Like if fraud is not being committed, there should be a waiver. There should be a waiver that says, hey, look, we're good, but there's not. And because of it, it causes a lot of issues for us when a house is about to drop because of an appraiser's opinion. Now, when I do this show and this topic, and I do it in front of a lot of people, 95% of the appraisers, fantastic. Top of the line, do their job exactly like they should. It's the few bad apples that give this group a bad name. But I'll tell you one that I did recently, and it's the objection that I'm making. So I valued the home. I'd like to think that I'm more than capable of valuing a home, probably even better than the average person out there. I'll go that far, right? And the appraisal comes back and it's off by $50K. And I'm like, there ain't no way it's off 50,000. So I go and I look and I find out that the appraiser is in his first year. Not that I care, because I don't penalize somebody for that. They're a lot of people in their first year smarter than someone's in their 20th year. But first year, out of Mobile, Alabama, not in Dallas-Fort Worth, doing an area one, and he's telling me, who's expertise in the same area for 20 years, that I'm wrong and he's right. I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense on the face of this earth. And we're about to bounce a loan because of this guy's requirements, the way he did it per instructed, which wasn't even right.
That's $50,000 is a big gap. Like, did you not look at any of the comps?
He cost a family house too. Now, his comps are ridiculous. His comps went from, he skipped 3 or 4 neighborhoods that had perfectly normal houses. He went to another zip code that had a different tax. I mean, I'm just like, who taught you how to do this? Now, this, again, very small percentage, but it happens. And you start getting into these things. So another part of our conversation, it's deeper into the how they value things. So the pool conversation, I'd actually like to hear Gary on this. Gary, so you and I both know there's myths about the pool. There's a lot of people that think when you build a pool that you completely already lost money. That's not true. It depends. But the appraisers, they have a different view on how they look at pools, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. You've got some appraisers that think that, it's a luxury amenity and they'll give it X, Y, Z, maybe 20% of its original cost and value, maybe even less. But it's
that's
also,
what I love. See, that's the part. See, I never knew what it was, the percentages, but I've always known the common sense level of how do you figure it's worth that? Like you can have an appraiser go in there and let's say you just put in a $50,000 pool and you have the receipt. The appraiser goes in there the next day. I've seen them go, it's 30. I'm like, how? How do you figure?
or less.
He's
It's
got
driving the cough a lot.
Yeah. But, and then, that's one of those, elective amenities sometimes for the person who paid the freight. But I haven't seen a $50,000 pool in the last 5 years. Most of them, they get into it. Everybody starts chuckling, especially Richa, because she knows where I'm going with this. They say, oh, yeah, we've got a pool deal for you. And it ends up starting at 40 and ending up at 90.
No, the average pool right now, we're talking we're not talking Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Go ahead.
A rectangular pool. We're not talking a grotto. We're not talking a slide. We're talking about a pool with a hot tub. $85,000 to $95,000.
Have you heard me say that, Richa? Because I've been saying that exact. You're a little higher, but still close.
No, I'm not. Maybe by 10, by like $5,000.
Michael going, oh, higher.
No, I'm talking a basic
We just
pool.
finished our pool. It's higher.
No laser show.
Okay, Michael, it's not our fault that you build a grotto. That is not the same.
I don't have a grotto.
He doesn't have a grotto.
Yeah.
He wants the grotto.
You have Hugh
You're right.
Hefner's
At a
pool that
minimum.
does not count.
But
At a minimum, $75K. at
The
basic
point is-
minimum. No, this used to be.
It costs
used to be
$90,000 to
35
build a pool. It's 3
Yeah,
cars.
35 or
the point is, why don't they give closer to the realistic value of what something costs than just their maybe limited educated opinion?
That's the entire point of this show too. That's entirely what I wanted to we could talk about appraisal for months, but that was the one thing I really wanted to focus in on today, because we do have a valuation problem. We have a valuation problem with the way an appraiser says this is worth that. So one of the myths out there is, like I said, a lot of people say when you start building a pool, the moment you start digging in the ground, you're losing money. That's not true. In all the pools,
You're not building a pool for money.
Yeah.
You're building a pool to not get a heat stroke in Texas. That is the reason you're building a pool.
In all the pools I've ever sold, I've never under 500K. I've never seen someone not get their value out of the pool. So that myth is wrong. Now, where the myth is right, and it's what Mike and Richa were talking about, where the myth is correct, when you start going over 80 or 90K and you do start putting a laser.
But that's where they are now.
No,
it's not about going over that.
Well, no, what I'm saying is you lose your money then. Then you're certainly not getting that back. That's the point I'm making, is that once it crosses that, you are, in fact, the myth is correct. But the average pool, they're going to get their money. But a lot of people think they'll lose money on their pool. I'm like, no. I go, it should come back. Now, this conversation is not for a luxury. There are a lot of luxury homes that have a 400K pool that actually add value because of its uniqueness. But the run-of-the-mill home, if it's got a pool with a run-of-the-mill pool, it should carry its value. It's like Gary said. But even in regular average houses where they say, well, it's worth 15. I'm like, well, how'd you get there? Now we're at 80 or 90. Gary, that's actually a point I would like to ask some of our champions instructors. I'd be like, or the appraisers like Robbie and them, I'd be like, hey, how are you teaching that right now? You realize that the price of a pool has gone up, right? You guys aren't still teaching them that you value a pool at 15. That's actually, I'd like to know, because I don't think some of them are doing it.
I think they're just going by standardized, and this is just my opinion. This is not backed up in any fact, but I've seen so many appraisals to where they had a really nice pool, something like Michael has, something like Richa would appreciate. You know, my pool is a little green thing in the
Right
backyard. So, but the key thing is historically they way undervalue because they do not know the true replacement cost. And let's go to a method of the appraisal. The replacement cost of what a swimming pool is, or maybe just not willing to allow it. And
I love
then
it. I love it. I love it. I love the pool. I love that example. You know, we can switch the conversation. This is one of my favorites, and I saw this one recently. There's one of the big islands, you know, and the appraiser, he tags it as granite, and he gives it a $5,000 value. So I go through and I look at the appraisal and I see where the upgrade is. So we don't normally talk to the appraisers. I want to make that very clear. We're not supposed to, and because of that friendly, you know, Dodd-Frank Act or whatever. But sometimes absurdity just can't stop someone, whether it's federal law or not. Nothing is a federal law about telling someone that's ridiculous what you just said. So in this particular case, I called the guy. Surprised he answered me. I saw on that appraisal that you put $5,000 down for that granite. He's like, that's correct. I go, well, it's actually not correct. I go, there's two big problems with it. One, you're not close to what it cost. And he starts talking. I'm like, oh, I go, you don't let me finish. I go, and it's not granite. I go, it's an Italian marble cut of a rare kind that they had to ship for. I go, you see? I go, that's the problem with someone like you valuing that, because you don't have the knowledge to value that piece of stone. And that's an issue that we can talk about on almost every single thing in an upgrade, that possibility exists. And until that problem is corrected, we're going to still see issues with the way someone values a home. And it's becoming a problem. Whoever thought that subjectivity was a great way to do this, I'm like, no, it's not. You know, Phil's response when he came on was great. You know, he said, well, we account for the upgrades, and we do too. We're not saying that we see a house that has a ton of upgrades and we just like say, well, that doesn't matter. I'm like, it does, but we damn well don't start saying that's 15, that's 20, that's 30. Can you imagine the nightmare we would have if our agents, we can't get some of ours to write the contract outright, more or less giving me a price point on
No, but there has to be some kind of industry standard, right? That generally most real estate agents go by. So yes, marble is different than granite, but marble I bought in America versus I wanted this unique one of a kind shipped in thing from Italy. That's a personal choice that you made, and that's the price and cost of luxury that you have paid to enjoy for yourself.
You bought it for your enjoyment, right?
You bought it for your enjoyment. There is a tax, there's a fee, whatever you want to call it. There's a price you pay for enjoying the luxury. Okay? So yes, there's a big difference between Formica and marble, but there is no difference for an average home buyer, marble purchased at Home and Floor and Decor or versus something flown in from Italy.
Well, you brought up another point too, though. The whole reason why for years we would tell people, like the earlier example I gave, that you put $100,000 into your house. I'm like, I don't care. I hope you enjoyed it. The general rule of thumb is that you put upgrades in for your own personal enjoyment. Where the problem comes into is it valued? I mean, do we really value it that way? Because it is more valuable per fact, but how far is it? That becomes a real tough thing. I think what's missing, and I know why they don't have it, because they couldn't do it, but I think what's really missing is there should be a set dollar amount that if they're about to go over, they clarify. They're like, hey, look, that counter over the island.
You are an accountant.
Your true colors are showing.
Using love language to me here, Robert.
I mean, why the F do we audit stuff? We audit stuff to make sure that somebody is in line with what they're doing. And that's exactly where you go back and go, hey, look, I know that has more work to it. I can't. Do you have anything that can show me that homeowner will be able to tell you that value? They'll be able to prove that value. I think that those things should be entered in. Now, I know why they can't. because it'd be impossible.
Yeah, there's what something costs in Texas versus Hawaii
Right.
versus Kentucky versus Idaho is
Right.
completely different. Now,
Thank
if you're going to get down to it and try to have a set, the whole point of Dodd-Frank and all the appraisal process, right, was to have regulatory tools to have some kind of financial reform from frauds trying to
That's right.
take
To
advantage,
eliminate fraud,
right?
to
So
prevent
you made
fraud.
a bunch of line items to abide by, but you left it halfway. You didn't finish the project.
That's exactly what happened.
You didn't connect the dots, and you do. And yes, you're right. It is going to be difficult to come up with a regulatory standard for each state.
I think Richa hit it right on the head.
But what other choice do you have?
Yeah, there is no regulatory standard for based on regional. And what we're looking at is when you brought up the example back when we had to deal with the appraisal management companies 2-3 years back, you would have a guy in, Cincinnati, Ohio, trying to tell you what the value of something was in South Texas. Well, that's like asking somebody from New York, what's Louisiana gumbo supposed to taste like?
That
Who has no clue?
Well, so it's a systematic problem to me, and so I'll liken it to something in accounting, and I'll connect the dots for you. But I don't know if all of you remember Enron. Everyone remembers Enron in general, right? So in the accounting world, it used to be you did things because you knew they were the right thing to do, and then some people came through and did the wrong things. And so the way they fixed it was they made so many rules that now no one knows what the right thing is and not. So they made too many rules. So now you can't actually do what the right thing is, even if you know you're doing the wrong thing, because you'll get your license taken away. And I think there's a lot of that in appraising, right? So we've got to the point where common sense isn't even a question because these guys are worried about their license. I personally knew 3 good appraisers that didn't make it through that. And I could have told you, knowing them, they were good guys trying to do the right thing. They weren't messing with values, but they made so many rules they took out the ability to use common sense.
So you just brought the other point that I wanted to make too, and anybody who follows me and it's a primary punchline I use for everything. I do detest when common sense has been removed because.
But not everybody has it.
That's
where the few rotten apples that don't have it ruin it for the rest of the group.
You want to get into what problems of the world are. You don't have to go too technical. That lack of common sense is one of the biggest barriers in any problem we have because you look at someone and go, how did you come to that conclusion? Where did your mindset say that this was okay? And that's exactly what the problem is. The common sense was taken out. So now you got someone who is following guidelines that really don't make sense to them, but they're told you have to do that guideline. You're like, yeah, but I know good and well that that's not. And then they're handcuffed, and they can't do what they were hired to do in the first place. They become so red tape bureaucratic, which is one of the major problems right now in both the appraisal and the lending industries. And in defense of them, I get it. The amount of deceitful people out there and what they're able to pull probably merits it. There's got to be a happy medium between someone going, wait, there's no way that house was off 40 or 50K. If you went by the guideline, great, but what you did was too far. There's no way anybody, even a child, could have come in here and said, this is worth that. That's the type of mentality that should be used, and it's missing. And it goes back to the old saying where, you got very high up people, powerful people making decisions that affect the people that use it day to day that actually don't know how to use those things. I'd love to. So I do have a problem with the Dodd-Frank Act, and I'd love for those individuals to sit in front of me and go, what was your background in housing? Because I know both of them don't have it, but I'd like to hear it because I'd be like, you realize that you'd have to have that piece of it to make those laws, right? I go, that wasn't just finance driven that you did. It was driven off of what the house, or you don't know any of that stuff. See, that's the problem. That's the problem. You have people who make the rules and like, yeah, but you're not in them. You didn't swim in them. You don't know how to swim in it. And you just told everybody else where you're going to swim in it regardless, even though I don't know how. And that's a big problem right now. It gets bigger every day. Richa brought up the other punchline to this is that now we're going in an opposite way where the houses were so high valued that it didn't matter whether they were off a few percentage points or not, but they were still off. Another thing I wanted to talk about And this one, I continue to wait for the right answer, and I ain't got it yet. Actually, I take that back. So this is funny. So I was on a show earlier. Which show was it that was it? Which one talked about the interest rate being? It might have been Clint that said it about the interest rate being off on the value. I can't remember what I wanted to say about it. It hit me, and I was like, "That's an important point that we're missing right now." On, give me a second. The value back off. I'll remember as we go through. It's a piece where, oh God, what was it that he said that was so important? I can't remember it. But having those guys in there making these types of rules, it causes a struggle for us. And it's day to day that we're having to go through this. We end up going through long explanations with the individual who did it. Then we have to go through long explanations with the general public, which God forbid, that's even worse, because we couldn't explain it to the person who knew what they were doing, more or less to the person that doesn't know what they're, oh, I know what I was going to say. The value, I knew it would come back to me. So some appraisers now these days, you see an appraisal and it's done, the value, the contract was $850 and the appraisal miraculously comes back at $851 or $852, you know, and it's not $852. It's clearly worth like $950 or $960, but the appraiser went in there and they did that. So that's a conversation that I think is worthy of having too, because I've heard mixed emotions on this. So I've heard some people say that they do it because, you know, why go any further if it satisfied the goal? I'm like, yeah, but then you got some that say, but that's not what it's worth. Weren't you hired to tell me what you think it's worth? And where I was going with, I don't know if it was Clint or Phil, but they were talking about, then you also, that's why I froze, because I don't think it was them. I think it was the other show I was on earlier. They talked about that it doesn't necessarily, that value, it's not there. They don't understand, they're missing it. And I'm just like, well, which one is it going to be? I mean, which one, if they're saying if they valued it at $950, that the seller would come back and say, well, I knew you were wrong. Why did we sell at $850? And they're saying that they're doing it to prevent that. I'm like, well, that's not what they were hired to do. Whether that was true or not, they were hired to tell us what their value was. Well, some of them don't do that. So I'm kind of like, well, how do you do that?
Well, in a free market, if someone's offering you $850 for that house, then theoretically that's what the house is worth.
Right.
I mean, if it's come down, then it's come down because that's what you're being offered. So that is the value of the home. You know,
and Gary, this is important for you too, because you've been doing this too. They've recently changed the testing to where when they ask for value, this is good for anybody that's out there that's pre-licensed. They'll ask you, is your what is the best example of our representation of value? And it will say A, the list price, B, the contract price, or C, the appraisal price, or D, none of the above. And the answer is the appraisal price. They do say that the appraisal value is the market value. Even if the appraiser was wrong, they're saying that is the value. I found that interesting. I was like,
and that I just have to sit in front of a classroom of newly about to be licensed either agents and some more experienced brokers. And whenever I use that as an example, I cringe every time I say it, because I'm saying, okay, I want to add a little footnote, if the appraiser really knows what he's doing, but you can't say things like that. But we're educating the public to accept one individual's, shall we say, professional licensed opinion of what value is, and not to put another layer of pepper on top of the already salty dish. I just was presented with a big problem by one of my agents down here, where a guy, really nice home, 4 years old, about 2,000 square feet. He elected to go ahead after he had this built on his acreage and upgrade and put after the snowmogeddon of 2020, which I think we all remember. He said, well, I'm not going through that again because I'm out in the country. He put in honestly, a 200 square foot solar panel array with a backup battery system and automatic switch, and he said he spent 50K on it. I went, golly. And
Oh,
quite honestly, what value does that have now?
yeah.
There's a guy next to him that's basically got a butane tank sitting out, behind his, tool shed, which
Well,
1,000-gallon butane
Next to his
tank.
$90,000 pool.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. So are they worth the same thing, all being conservatively equal? But
that's a great.
What value do you put on that?
Yeah, that's a great tie into where.
Depends on the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Remember
That's
we
what-
talked about how the houses are appraised, cost,
Yeah.
location, age, and the other characteristics is what this falls under.
Right.
All the other frills that are part of the dress that you're
That's
putting
a
on that pig.
it's a
How
great-
nice is the dress that you put on that pig,
So
basically?
what
Yeah,
I
well,
wanted to conclude
We
with,
unfortunately have to deliver the bad news, Robert.
Yes,
no, I
Boom.
agree. I agree.
for the bad news bears.
One thing that Gary's talking about, and it's a great way to segment to the ending here. It does bring up the question: what does the future look like when it comes to appraisal? So Gary brought up something that is more obscure, but I'll bring you up something that all of us are starting.
Hey, it was a great show.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
That's a great point.
I'm
There he
done.
is. He's back.
It's getting to where
Cliffhanger.
we're going to start seeing the wind. We've seen a lot of the wind powered stuff. So you see a lot of the big, like a university, like up in North Texas, the University of North Texas, you see all the big windmills. You see in Coppell, on North Lake, these are places that are powered because of wind. We've been seeing recently a lot of luxury homes that you have like Gary was talking about, not solar panels, but we've started seeing windmills on top of the pool equipment, and it's using the power from the wind to power the pool. Well, y'all, that technology is expensive, whereas solar panels.
That's 20K.
Yeah, Whereas you see solar panels, 30 years ago, nobody could afford them. Well, even today, they're still expensive, but they're still more affordable. So you see more of them. Well, you're going to start seeing that with wind, especially in places like Texas, where wind is very prevalent. And, a lot of people always refer to Chicago as the windy city. I'm like, that's a political term, right? It's not a weather term. It refers to how many people come in and out of office. We are actually the windiest state in the country. Well, you have people that are learning how to harness that power. It's only a matter of time before those devices become more prevalent. And then you start saying just what Gary said. Well, how much did that cost? Was it 50? Was it 30? And are we now talking about something that was for the seller's enjoyment, or was it talking about, no, that actually improved the value of that house because that house's power bill is significantly lower than that guy? So you start getting into how does that work? Where does that go? And the one last thing I'm going to mention, and this is a whole nother show combined. In fact, Phil, we might bring you back to this one, and Clint as well. When you start talking about what assumptions are going to do, this country is about to witness the greatest amount of assumptions in the history of us doing this. You have hundreds and thousands of Americans who purchased a home under a government note that most are assumable at under 4%, and you're about to get to a market that might be at 7 or 8%. Those people are about to put their houses on the market, and they're going to flat out say, the guy next to me, you're paying 8%. You can get my house for 4%. So I'll cut you a deal. You give me another 75 or 100K for my house, and I'll save you 200, 300K in interest. I can't wait to see how we start valuing that, because what you're going to find is you're going to start getting MLSs that are going to actually have to have an addition that says this was given on an assumable and they're going to have to factor that in. So the conversation is fascinating when it comes to the world of appraisal and how it affects us. And, today's judgment was really just to talk about some of the problems that we have. So for all the agents, that are especially new inside that 1 to 5 year range, the takeaways today should have been, look, some of those things can cause problems and you need to get yourself familiar with them. But the subject is greater and much deeper than what we discussed here. Y'all, I want to thank everybody for always watching. I want to thank my buddy Phil Goff for coming on again. Of course, always Michael, Gary, and Richa, good friends of mine. We can't do the show without them. Literally on almost 3 years now, 150, 160 episodes or so, which continues to show the content is very valid for the people who watch. So thank y'all for watching. We'll see you guys soon. Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks, Robert.